Well, let's have a quick chat about Moderna because, wow, has that done well. In fact, I think 20% higher overnight as it asks the American and European regulators to give the all clear for its vaccine candidate. So what's left for the vaccine trade and other companies who competed in this race? Michael Frazis joins us now from Frazis Capital Partners here in Barangaroo. Michael, always great to see you.
Great to see you. Thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, great.
Moderna.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fantastic company when you think about it. It's just, the surprising thing about all these companies is how much opportunity you had to buy these companies. You know, it's up about 8 times since after they kind of put their vaccine into their first trials. It's been a really strong investment. But if you had to pick one vaccine to take, I think Moderna is probably the best one here.
Yeah.
You know, the AstraZeneca Oxford one has had problems, which they've resolved. The data's the least conclusive. It's also made from chimpanzee virus, which is like a little bit unsettling for some people. And the Pfizer one, you know, needs to be refrigerated, which obviously, so minus 70 degrees.
So there's still a lot of the runway to go in terms of the story as to how these are distributed and how the rollouts go, et cetera, et cetera. But from a pure investment perspective, I mean, Michael, when do you start thinking, you know, all the good news is baked in and you start taking profits in Moderna? Well,
it depends why you're there. I mean, the short-term trade is probably, you know, you probably start taking profits now. But the reality is, you know, they've proven that mRNA works. You know, they developed this vaccine without a single biological sample. You know, the Chinese scientists uploaded the genetic code of coronavirus in a file. They then downloaded it in the US, and they created the vaccine just using that data. You know, this is such a powerful tool. It'll work for many, many different viruses, many different conditions. You know they're going to make billions of dollars of free cash flow by selling their current vaccine, which they're then going to be able to put into their next set of developments. So there's a very good long-term play here.
What is the next term sort of phase of developments for Moderna? Clearly they were working on something before COVID-19, so do we have a lot of visibility on what could potentially come next?
Yeah, I think about 15 in the pipeline. They're mostly viruses, things like CMV. I think they're working on, they think they can use their product to help target cancer as well. That's probably a bit harder. That's like another thing they'll need to prove. But you know, most viruses, particularly ones that aren't protected on the surface, you know, we can actually see those surface proteins, they should work. So it's very interesting, very exciting time for them.
It should work, but I mean, the history of these kinds of companies would suggest that, you know, there's a lot of hurdles to jump, and not all hurdles get jumped, and there's often a bit of delay. Is there a risk now that although they've got such promising technology and they've had such wonderful success, I mean, they won't be, you know, nothing but net for everything they shoot at, for everything, right? Surely we have to factor in some risk there.
Definitely. But I think with biotech, there's kind of two, or we like to divide them into 2 categories. There's the ones that are like the single drug, and even if they have a pipeline, you know, there'll be different small molecules or different things that aren't really related. Like no real reason for one to work. If one works, there's no reason to suspect that the other one's going to work. Then there's a few companies that have this ability to generate a whole pipeline of assets, often because they've got expertise in one particular area or one particular technology. So it's not just Moderna, it's companies like Alnylam, companies that have, you know, market leaders in specific life sciences space. They can regenerate their pipeline. So, you know, if a few candidates fail, they'll have another 15 to 20, you know, at various stages of development. And Moderna's got a couple now that are, or one that will shortly be approved, one in phase 3 that should be approved shortly, and then a whole like stream of candidates coming through. So yeah, it's hard to say if any one of those will succeed, but will a number of those in the pipeline? Probably.
Yeah.
More than a few irons in the fire there. So
okay, Michael, curious to get we're just going to leave that whole sort of vaccine talk right there. Bitcoin is another one that we haven't discussed yet. Yeah, I think that's all-time highs for Bitcoin.
Yeah, I guess it's an interesting time. You know, think about the psychology of bubbles. So it's Bitcoin and cannabis. They both kind of peaked at the same time. Also global equity markets in a way.
Correlation or causation there, Michael?
I think it was all the same kind of speculative frenzy, you know. It's and then what was it? The 2 years after that were just horrible, not just for equity markets, but Bitcoin obviously lost most of its value. Its cannabis stocks dropped 95%. But now you've had a lot of time. You know, both those communities have developed. You know, all that speculative frenzy is gone. All the people that were going to sell on price did, because they basically lost all their value. So then you kind of had this like 6 to 12 month period where, you know, we're kind of consolidating a base. You know, the people who are selling on because it's falling, that was over. And then in the crypto space, you've got things like, you know, Square and PayPal are now offering it. People are starting to think the risk reward is there. You know, put 1 to 3% of your assets, you're actually risking that much. But you think about the upside here, Bitcoin's like a few $100 billion market cap. That's like a medium to large sized US tech company. It's not actually that big if you think about it in that context. Apple was $2 trillion at one point. I'm not sure what it's trading now. There's several companies over $1 trillion around the world. Bitcoin's like a fraction of that. So in that context, it doesn't seem so crazy anymore. So I think it's an interesting time for crypto.
Well, so just to pick up on that PayPal Square comment that you dropped in there, because we had a lot of legitimacy, I suppose, given to Bitcoin when we started to hear that the JP Morgans of the world, et cetera, were coming in and beginning to trade it. So at what legitimacy, or how does Square and PayPal being in cryptos change the story or the narrative or reinforce its future?
Well, I think it just makes it easier. I mean, let's say you want to buy your first bit of Bitcoin. What are you going to do? Where do you go? There's so many different sites. Like a significant number of them are fraudulent. But you probably already have an account with PayPal. I actually think Square's the most interesting one. Like Square, it's kind of like this idea in payments, like the kind of holy grail of payments, to have a closed loop. So when you buy and sell something and transfer money, it all happens in one system. Everybody's tried to achieve that, but nobody's really been able to do it. And the reason you want to do it is because you can cut out all those layers of payment providers. So it's not just Visa and MasterCard and the banks. It's also, switches. There's so many layers. Every now and then you find a whole new business that has specialized in a whole new layer of this payment stack. But if you've got the users and the merchants and everybody in the same platform, be it PayPal or something else, all that can be captured by the platform provider. And they can also do things instantly, easily reconcile because it's all in their own databases. That's the holy grail. And we think Square's probably the most likely to get there. So Square started with those little Square things that the merchants have. And they're extremely successful in rolling that out around the United States and the world. And now obviously it's all done via app. But recently they set up a cash app. And the cash app in the US went from 15 million users to 30 million. It's got about 10% of the US that's using Square's cash app, maybe 15 times a month on average. So now if you can use Square's cash app on a merchant, Square thing, that all happens inside that closed loop. And considering how fast that's growing, there's a good chance they actually achieve it. It's kind of unrelated to the question about Bitcoin, but it's strikingly interesting that that those 30 million people will firstly have access to Bitcoin, but also looks like Square might be one of the best ways to play this, recovery in payments and also be the first to achieve this closed loop. Anyway, it's a few thoughts there.
Fascinating.
Yeah. But I think we've talked about on this show recovery plays. I think the best ones are the ones where they're already doing really well, already growing 50, 60, 70%, but are also exposed to a cyclical recovery. And Square's probably in that basket. Because they're already growing super fast, but as people go back and start buying in store, that whole business line of Square will come back online.
I think it's an interesting point you make, though. I think often with investors, you sort of see these strong moves, a bit of the narrative sort of coming to the fore, and you think, oh, well, I've missed it. Shares are already up threefold. The PE's 400 or something like that. It's too late. Yet there are very long runways with a lot of these thematics.
Yeah. I was speaking to somebody who sold his fintech company for an absolute fortune recently. And he said basically, the internet is still a lot smaller than we all think. And I thought it was so interesting. It's 2020. We've come so far in the last year, 2 years, 5 years, 20 years, but we're still probably just at the beginning. And that suggests that you can invest in these probably throughout our lifetime and still do quite well.
Michael Frazis, great chat. Thank you.
Thank you.
Look forward to the next one.